The air in the upscale downtown restaurant was thick with conversation, the clink of silverware, and the hum of quiet jazz music in the background. It was a usual Friday evening, the kind where people came to unwind after a long week. Dr. Marcus Lee, a respected black doctor in his mid-30s, sat alone at a corner booth, absorbed in a steaming bowl of pasta. He wasn't there for anything special, just a break from the grueling hours at the hospital, a quiet moment of peace. But that peace shattered when Officer Daniels pushed open the restaurant door. The man didn't look out of place, tall, stocky, with a uniform that commanded authority. His posture was rigid, his eyes scanning the room with a cold, deliberate intent. He didn't acknowledge anyone, he didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make everyone stop and notice. It wasn't uncommon for uniformed officers to walk in, maybe for a coffee or a quick meal. But this officer wasn't there for any of that. The eyes of the room seemed to follow him as he made his way to the back of the restaurant, right towards Marcus's booth. Marcus didn't notice at first. He was too wrapped up in the thoughts that came with the week's workload. The hospital had been chaos, emergency surgeries, critical patients, and barely any sleep. A quick dinner alone was supposed to be a brief escape from it all. But the calm he had enjoyed was slipping away as the officer got closer. Something in the air felt different. Suddenly, he felt a presence looming. He looked up. Officer Daniels was standing just in front of him now, his stern face casting a shadow over Marcus's dinner. Marcus froze. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he felt his heart rate spike. There was no reason for a cop to be standing at his table like this, and the look in the officer's eyes didn't make it seem like a friendly encounter. There was an edge to it, a sense of urgency that made Marcus uneasy. "Dr. Lee?" Officer Daniels's voice was sharp, his tone commanding. "Yes?" Marcus replied, his voice steady but his mind racing. He was trying to figure out what this was about. "Come with me," Daniels said, his words carrying the authority of someone who had already made up his mind. "We need to talk." Marcus blinked, momentarily unsure of how to respond. He didn't recognize this officer. And he couldn't fathom why an officer would approach him so directly. It wasn't like he was doing anything out of the ordinary. He was just eating dinner. "Excuse me?" Marcus's voice came out a little sharper than he intended. "I'm just having dinner. Is there a problem?" Daniels's expression didn't change. "You heard me," he said, his voice growing more forceful. "I said, come with me." Panic began to rise in Marcus's chest. Something wasn't right. He glanced around the restaurant, other patrons were starting to notice the scene unfolding. Their conversations slowed, eyes shifting to the growing tension between the doctor and the officer. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked again, his eyes narrowing as he stood slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The officer didn't respond with words. Instead, he stepped forward, closing the gap between them, and grabbed Marcus by the arm. The sudden force shocked Marcus, and before he could fully process what was happening, Daniels was pulling him toward the door. The room fell silent. The murmur of conversation died down as every eye in the restaurant was now on them. No one moved, unsure of what to do. Some looked uncomfortable, some curious, but all were waiting for what would happen next. "Let go of me," Marcus said, struggling to free his arm from the officer's grip. The panic he had been trying to suppress surged up, taking over his thoughts. "What's going on? Why are you doing this?" The officer's grip tightened. "You'll find out soon enough," he muttered under his breath, his tone still cold and unmoved. As they neared the door, Marcus felt his chest tighten with fear. This couldn't be happening. He was just a doctor, a regular person. He had no criminal history, no reason to be treated like this. The sudden rush of humiliation was enough to make his hands tremble. But it was more than that. His mind was racing, trying to piece together why he was being singled out like this. What did Officer Daniels want? Why was he being treated like a criminal in front of a crowded restaurant? This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it felt like something more. Just as they reached the door, one of the other patrons stood up. A woman, mid-50s, her face contorted in confusion and discomfort. "Hey! What's going on here?" she shouted, her voice breaking through the heavy silence. "Let him go." The officer didn't respond. His eyes didn't even flicker in the direction of the woman. He kept walking, dragging Marcus toward the exit with an alarming amount of force. Marcus's mind was racing. He tried to think, to process what was happening, but it was all happening too quickly. He wasn't used to being in this kind of situation. Sure, he had faced challenges in his life, racism, prejudice, the stress of his job, but this? This was different. This was public humiliation, and he could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, judging him, wondering why this was happening. The door swung open, and cold night air hit Marcus's face like a slap. He was outside now, still struggling in the officer's grip. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, drowning out the sounds of the street. "Let me go," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, but laced with desperation. "Not yet," Daniels replied, his hand tightening on Marcus's arm. And then, just when Marcus thought he couldn't take any more, a figure appeared from the shadows, someone he didn't expect, someone who would change everything. It was another officer. A woman. Dressed in plain clothes, walking towards them with a determined look on her face. She looked like she had come from the scene of something important. She glanced quickly at Marcus, then at Daniels. "Daniels," the woman said, her voice sharp. "Let him go." The words didn't register at first. Marcus blinked, his brain still trying to process what was going on. But the woman spoke again, more forcefully this time. "I said, let him go. Now." Daniels hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the woman's sudden arrival. His grip on Marcus's arm loosened, and he stepped back. "Who are you?" Daniels growled. "I'm the one who should be asking that question," the woman said, her eyes narrowing. "Do you know who you're dealing with?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time that night, Marcus felt a small sliver of hope. What was happening? Who was this woman? But then, as the officer stepped back and Marcus caught his breath, the woman's next words sent a chill down his spine. "Dr. Lee, it seems you've been targeted for something much bigger than you realize." Marcus Lee stood frozen on the sidewalk, his arms still stinging from where Officer Daniels had grabbed him. His heart was still pounding in his chest, but now, there was a flicker of hope. The woman who had intervened was no longer just some random bystander, she was something much more significant. Her arrival had shifted the power dynamic in a way Marcus hadn't expected. She stood before him with confidence, her dark eyes scanning Daniels before locking onto Marcus, assessing him like a puzzle she was ready to solve. "I'm sorry, Dr. Lee," the woman said, her voice calm but edged with authority. "I didn't mean for you to get caught up in this." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His mind was racing, still processing everything that had happened in the last few minutes. What was going on? Why had Daniels acted the way he did? And most importantly, who was this woman? "Who are you?" Marcus managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. He felt the weight of the question in his chest, heavy with the desire for answers. The woman's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "My name is Detective Emma Hayes," she said, her tone direct and professional. "And what just happened in there, with Daniels, isn't a mistake. But it's something far bigger than you or me." Marcus felt the word detective resonate in his mind, but it didn't make him feel any less confused. Detective? This wasn't some random cop hassle. This was orchestrated. And from the way she spoke, it sounded like it had been planned. "What do you mean it's bigger than me?" Marcus asked, struggling to keep his voice steady as he looked between Hayes and Daniels. Daniels, still standing a few feet away, seemed to hesitate. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then closed it, his eyes flicking to Hayes for guidance. It was clear he didn't want to be caught in the middle of something more complicated than he could handle. Hayes wasn't paying him any attention now. She stepped closer to Marcus, her face softening. "You're not just any doctor, Marcus. You've been targeted because of something you don't even realize yet." Marcus's brow furrowed. "Targeted? I'm just a doctor. I do my job. What are you talking about?" Before she could respond, Daniels cleared his throat, stepping forward. His face had gone pale, as if something had just dawned on him. He looked at Hayes, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't be telling him this, Hayes. This isn't something." Hayes shot him a look that silenced him instantly. Then, with a long, deliberate breath, she turned back to Marcus. "What I'm about to tell you isn't easy to understand, but it's the truth. Someone is trying to send a message, and you're at the center of it. But this goes far beyond your profession. This goes into the kind of power and control that is not easily escaped." Marcus's pulse quickened again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was disbelief. How could a simple dinner date turn into something so ominous? He was just a man trying to live his life, and yet here he was, caught up in something that smelled like conspiracy. "I don't know what you mean," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I don't have enemies. I've worked hard to get where I am. I don't understand why any of this is happening." Hayes nodded, her expression softening again as she watched him process the information. "I know it's a lot to take in, but you've been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Do you remember what happened last week? A little incident that probably seemed like nothing?" Marcus's mind flashed back to the past week. It had been a hectic time at the hospital, but there had been a few strange moments. A patient who had been acting erratic, an unsettling phone call he'd received while in surgery, but nothing that had seemed noteworthy at the time. "I don't know," he said slowly, his voice uncertain. "A lot has happened." "What are you referring to? Do you remember the man you helped last Wednesday?" Hayes asked. "The one who collapsed in your office, who you resuscitated?" Marcus's mind clicked into focus. He did remember. The man had appeared out of nowhere, weak, disoriented, gasping for breath. He'd been in his early 40s, dressed in a nondescript suit, his face pale and drawn. Marcus had acted fast, recognizing the symptoms of a severe heart attack. It had been a high-pressure situation, but Marcus had saved him. But something about the man's demeanor had felt off. He hadn't been properly registered at the front desk, and when Marcus had tried to follow up with the medical records, the man's information had seemed incomplete. At the time, it hadn't raised any alarms, but now, as Hayes mentioned it, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. I didn't think much of it," Marcus admitted. "He seemed like just another patient who needed help." "Exactly," Hayes replied. "But he wasn't just any patient. He was sent here for a reason. And after you treated him, everything changed." Marcus's eyes widened. "Sent here? What do you mean?" "Marcus, that man was involved in something far darker than you could have imagined. He had connections to a group, an organization that works in the shadows. And now, you're involved too. You saved his life, but in doing so, you became part of their plan." The words hung in the air, and Marcus felt the ground beneath him tilt. He had known there was corruption in certain corners of the world, every doctor did. But this sounded like something out of a thriller novel. It didn't make sense. "You're telling me I'm in danger because I helped a man?" Marcus asked, his voice rising. "That's ridiculous. I'm a doctor. I took an oath to help people. I know, Hayes said, her voice low but urgent. And that's exactly why they're targeting you. You're a threat to them. Not because of who you are, but because of your position. People like you, Marcus, they don't understand the power of the forces you're dealing with. And now, they've found a way to manipulate you. A rush of anger mixed with confusion swept through Marcus. So what now? Am I supposed to just sit here and wait for them to come for me? What exactly is going on? We have to get you to safety, Hayes replied immediately. But first, you need to understand the gravity of this. You've been marked because you're someone who can disrupt their plans. But they won't stop at anything to silence you. They'll use everything they have. And right now, Daniels is part of that system. Daniels, still standing a few feet away, looked uncomfortable, but he didn't speak. He had been silent ever since Hayes had arrived. You're telling me he's part of this? Marcus asked, incredulous. Hayes didn't answer right away. She looked at Daniels, then back at Marcus. I'm not sure how much he knows, but I don't trust him. He was too quick to grab you earlier, too eager to pull you out of there without giving you any explanation. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He couldn't deny the suspicion that had been growing inside him. There was something off about the whole situation, and now, it seemed like it was all coming together in a way he hadn't expected. So what's the plan? Marcus asked, his voice firm with determination. Hayes glanced at Daniels once more before turning to Marcus. We need to move quickly. But first, you need to trust me. You need to believe that you're not just some random target. You're part of something that could change everything. Marcus nodded slowly. He wasn't sure where this was headed, but he knew one thing, his life had just changed forever. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting a dim glow across the cold street. Marcus could barely think straight. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, fear, and confusion. Detective Emma Hayes had dropped a bombshell, and he didn't know how to react. There was no way this was real. Was he really involved in something far bigger than himself? Could the simple act of saving a stranger's life lead him into this dangerous web? The longer he stood there, the more his world seemed to collapse in on itself. It was as if everything he thought he knew had been shattered in a matter of hours. His identity, his profession, everything, now it all seemed insignificant in the face of this mystery. Marcus glanced at Hayes, who was staring intently at the ground, her eyes calculating, as though piecing together a puzzle only she could see. She'd asked him to trust her, but that trust was hard to give. There was so much she hadn't told him, and the more he learned, the more it felt like she was holding something back. Something bigger. Where are we going? Marcus finally asked, his voice tense as he watched Hayes pull out her phone, tapping at the screen without looking up. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sent a quick text, then looked at him. We need to move quickly, Marcus. I don't want you to be in danger any longer than necessary. He frowned. You said I was a target. But I'm just a doctor. What could I possibly have to do with whatever this is? Hayes met his gaze. It's not just about who you are. It's about what you represent. You have access to things, information that they don't want getting out. I know it's hard to understand, but you're not just some random target. They've been watching you. Watching your every move. Marcus's stomach tightened. Watching him? For what? He was just a cardiologist. He dealt with hearts, not high-level conspiracy. Who are they, Hayes? Marcus pressed, his voice low. Who's behind this? And why are you involved? Why help me? She hesitated, her eyes flicking to Daniels, who had stayed eerily silent for the past few minutes. I can't explain everything yet, but trust me, you're not in this alone. I've been tracking this group for years. The one who sent the man to your office last week. The one you saved. They're connected to a larger, more dangerous organization than you can imagine. Marcus felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The more he learned, the less he understood. He had to focus, to get some sense of clarity. The detective had said she could protect him, but could she really? How much danger was he in? What's the plan? Marcus asked again, his eyes never leaving hers. Hayes exhaled sharply. First, we need to get you out of here. We'll head to a safe house for now. There's someone I need you to meet. A former associate of mine. He knows more about this group than anyone I've encountered. Former associate? Marcus repeated, confused. Who is he? She looked away, her face clouding with what seemed like regret. His name is Ethan Hayes. My brother. Marcus froze. Her brother? Was he supposed to feel comforted by that? Or was this another layer of mystery? She had already hinted at things being bigger than he realized. But why was her brother involved? The awkward silence was broken by Danielle's sudden movement. He had been standing at a distance, but now, he took a step forward, his voice cautious. I know what's going on, and I know you think I'm part of the problem. But you have to trust me, Dr. Lee. I didn't have a choice. Hayes turned sharply toward him. Don't say another word, Daniels. But he didn't stop. His gaze shifted from her to Marcus, and for the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. I didn't want any of this, Daniels continued, his voice shaky. But they know everything. Every move I make. They have control over me. Over all of us. Hayes clenched her fists. You're just a pawn in this game, Daniels. Don't act like you're the victim here. Daniels took a step back, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe I am a pawn, but that doesn't mean I can't help. They know about Marcus. I overheard them talking about him. And I'm not sure what their plan is, but it's something big. They want him gone. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Who's they? Who are these people? Before anyone could respond, a faint noise interrupted the conversation, a car engine. It was distant at first, but it was growing closer. Hayes's eyes flicked toward the road, then to Daniels. Time's up, she muttered. We need to move now. Marcus's pulse raced as Hayes grabbed his arm and started pulling him toward an alleyway. Stay close to me, she ordered. Daniels followed at a distance, his eyes darting nervously as they walked through the alley, heading toward an old, unmarked car. The atmosphere had shifted. The air felt heavier, thick with impending danger. Marcus wasn't sure whether it was the situation itself, or the adrenaline pumping through his veins, but everything around him seemed to move in slow motion. The sound of the car engine was louder now. Marcus turned to look, but Hayes urged him forward. Keep your head down. Don't look back. Trust me, I've got this. The moment they reached the car, Hayes opened the passenger door. Get in, she said. I'll explain everything once we're out of here. Marcus hesitated but climbed into the car. The interior was dark, and the air smelled of old leather and stale cigarettes. He leaned back in his seat, trying to gather his thoughts. What was going on? How had he gone from being a respected doctor to being involved in a conspiracy of some kind? The car lurched forward, and they sped off into the night, leaving the city behind. There was no turning back now. So, what's the plan? Marcus asked again, his voice louder this time, though the words felt hollow. Hayes glanced at him, her expression unreadable. We're going to lay low for a while. I'll take you to a safe house where you can rest. Tomorrow, we meet my brother. He's the one who has the answers. And after that? Marcus pressed. Hayes didn't look at him when she replied. After that, we take them down. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and Marcus could feel the weight of them pressing down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something bigger than him. Something that could change everything. The car turned sharply, heading down a dark road that twisted through a quiet part of the city. Marcus wasn't sure where they were going, but he knew one thing: there was no turning back. They were in this together now. And whatever came next, they had to face it. The hum of the car engine was the only sound that filled the air, a steady reminder of the long, uncertain road ahead. Marcus's thoughts were in a storm, spinning with questions and doubts, but he had learned something crucial in the last few hours. There were no clear answers yet, only layers of confusion and a growing sense of danger that seemed to close in from all sides. He glanced over at Hayes, who was driving with a tense focus, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. She hadn't said a word since they left the city, but that was no surprise. The silence between them felt more like an unspoken agreement, a mutual understanding that neither of them had the luxury of words at the moment. For Marcus, every minute that passed felt like another moment deeper into something he didn't fully understand. He was no longer just a doctor, no longer just someone who treated patients and lived a normal life. He was now entangled in something far more dangerous, something that he couldn't even begin to explain. And no matter how hard he tried to push it out of his mind, he kept hearing the words Daniels had said: "They want you gone." Gone? What did that even mean? What now? Marcus finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice was quieter than he meant it to be, but there was no going back. He couldn't just sit there in silence. "You said we were going to meet your brother. But what does he have to do with all of this? And why didn't you tell me about him before?" Hayes didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the road, her expression unreadable. "Because you didn't need to know about him yet," she said simply. "And because it's not the right time to explain. But soon, Marcus. Soon, everything will come to light. I just need you to trust me a little longer." Marcus bit back the urge to argue. Trust. That was all she had asked of him. Trust, when everything about this situation screamed that he should be cautious, no, more than cautious, suspicious. The twists were coming faster now, and every time he thought he might be able to see the bigger picture, it seemed to slip further out of reach. They drove for what felt like hours, the landscape outside changing from the city's sprawl to a quieter, rural area. The roads narrowed. And the occasional streetlight became a rare flicker in the distance. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had no idea where they were going, but this was getting darker by the minute. Finally, after an eternity of silence and unanswered questions, they pulled up to an old farmhouse at the edge of a wooded area. The lights were dim, and the structure looked like it had seen better days. It was isolated, too isolated, and that only added to Marcus's unease. "Welcome to the safe house," Hayes said, her tone distant. "Stay close." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the words as he stepped out of the car. He followed Hayes toward the house, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The woods surrounding them felt more oppressive than calming, and he had a nagging sense that they weren't alone out here. Every little rustle in the trees made him jump. Was someone watching them? Was this part of their plan? As they reached the door, Hayes knocked 3 times, sharp, deliberate knocks. Marcus's heart rate picked up. Who else was here? Who was waiting inside? The door opened a crack, revealing a man with tired eyes and a scruffy beard. He didn't say anything at first. Just studied them both, like he was sizing them up. When his eyes landed on Marcus, the man's expression softened just a fraction. "This is Dr. Marcus Lee," Hayes said, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." The man nodded but didn't open the door fully. "Come inside," he said quietly. Marcus stepped inside cautiously, his senses on high alert. The interior was modest, dimly lit, and filled with the scent of old wood and stale air. There was a large wooden table in the center of the room, covered in papers, photos, and a clutter of half-empty coffee mugs. It was a small, cramped place, but it felt strangely comforting in its simplicity. At least they were away from the prying eyes of the city. "Marcus, this is my brother, Ethan," Hayes introduced, her voice tinged with something Marcus couldn't place. "He's the one who knows what's going on. He'll tell you everything." Ethan Hayes stepped forward, his gaze meeting Marcus's with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "It's good to meet you, though I wish it were under different circumstances," he said, his voice low and steady. Marcus nodded, still trying to process the situation. Ethan was nothing like what he had expected. He had assumed that the brother of someone like Detective Hayes would be just as intense, maybe even a little intimidating. But Ethan was calm, collected, almost too calm, as though he had been through this type of meeting before. "Sit," Ethan gestured to one of the chairs at the table. "We have a lot to discuss." Marcus sat down, his eyes scanning the room as he tried to make sense of everything. The walls were covered with maps, string connecting various points, photos of different people. Some of the faces looked familiar, others not. It was like a crime scene investigation, no. More than that. This was personal. Hayes sat next to her brother, while Marcus remained silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. He felt like he had been tossed into a movie he didn't even know how to watch. There was no script for this. No manual for surviving the kind of nightmare he had found himself in. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You're here because you're important, Marcus. Do you understand that?" Marcus blinked, surprised by the bluntness. "I'm just a doctor. I don't know anything about what's happening." Ethan's eyes didn't leave him. "You may think that, but you're wrong. You're far more involved than you realize. You saved that man's life, and now they want you gone. And they'll stop at nothing to get to you." "Who are they?" Marcus pressed, his frustration creeping in. "Who's trying to kill me, and why?" Ethan paused, looking at his sister for a moment before answering. "They're part of a network, a group that's been operating in the shadows for decades. Their reach goes far beyond what you can imagine. They're involved in everything: politics, business, medicine. And you're a key part of their plan. Whether you realize it or not." Marcus's mind spun. It was impossible. He couldn't be part of something like that. He was just a cardiologist, just a man trying to help people. "Why me?" Marcus whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "What did I do to get tangled in this?" Ethan's voice softened, but there was no pity in his eyes. "It's not about what you did. It's about what you represent. And the fact that you're alive. You've got a role to play in all of this, Marcus. Whether you like it or not." Marcus felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. His mind raced as he tried to put the pieces together. None of this made sense. But then again, the more he learned, the less it seemed to make sense. Every new revelation only made him more certain of one thing: he was in over his head. The room was silent for a moment. The tension hung heavy in the air. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice calm but urgent. "You're not safe here, Marcus. Not for long. They'll be coming for you." Marcus's heart dropped. "Coming for me? Who? Who are they?" Before Ethan could answer, a loud banging echoed from the front door. The sound of the door slamming against the wall echoed in the small house, sending a jolt through Marcus's spine. It was unmistakable, the kind of noise that made every fiber in your body scream, "Run." But there was nowhere to go. No escape from what was coming next. Marcus's eyes darted toward the door as the sound of boots pounding against the wooden floor grew louder. Hayes and Ethan didn't move. They didn't even flinch. But Marcus could see the tension in their posture, the way they prepared themselves, bracing for something. "We need to go," Hayes muttered under her breath, barely audible over the noise. But Marcus was frozen. His mind was still trying to make sense of everything, even as the pounding footsteps grew closer. They couldn't just be here for him, could they? Were they finally coming to finish what they'd started? A man's voice, low and commanding, broke through the chaos outside. "Clear the house. Get in, find him." Marcus's heart raced. He could feel the weight of his own breath on his chest as panic set in. They were here. Whoever they were, they had arrived. And Marcus was caught in the middle of a storm that didn't care who he was. Only that he had to be taken down. "We don't have much time," Ethan said, his voice calm but urgent. "Hayes, go to the back. We'll hold them off as long as we can." "No," Hayes's eyes flared with defiance. "We're not running. Not yet. He has to know the whole truth." Marcus felt a cold knot settle in his stomach. The truth about what? Who are these people, and why are they after me? His voice cracked with the weight of his questions. "I'm just a doctor. I don't understand. I didn't sign up for any of this." Ethan stepped closer to Marcus, his eyes locking onto his. "You didn't sign up for it, but it doesn't matter now. You're in this whether you like it or not. The truth. The real truth." It seemed like everything he had believed in had been shattered over the last few days. From the moment he had been publicly humiliated in the restaurant, to being dragged into this twisted game of shadows and lies, Marcus had been tossed into a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The deeper he got, the less real everything felt. His life as a doctor seemed like a lifetime ago. Hayes's voice cut through the fog of his thoughts. "They're after you because you were part of something bigger than you ever realized. It's all connected, Marcus. The money, the politics, the lives that are at stake, they all lead back to you." Marcus shook his head, trying to push back the flood of disbelief. "How? What does this have to do with me? I'm just a man who treats patients. I've never been involved in anything like this." "Exactly," Ethan said, as if everything were falling into place. "You've never been involved. But you were meant to be. You just didn't know it yet." Marcus stood there, feeling a wave of frustration and confusion threatening to overwhelm him. How could he be a part of something this big? He had always thought of his life as simple. His work, his family, his patients. All straightforward. Now it felt like his world had been ripped apart and reconstructed in some twisted way that didn't make any sense. Before he could process it any further, Hayes turned to the door. "We don't have much time. Get ready." There was no time for more questions. No more time to think. The door crashed open, and several men in tactical gear stormed into the house, their boots thundering against the floor. Marcus felt the panic rising in his chest, but Hayes was already moving, grabbing him by the arm and pulling him toward the back door. "Move, Marcus," she urged. They bolted through the back of the house, running into the dense forest beyond. Marcus stumbled over the uneven ground, his heart pounding, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He didn't know where they were going, he didn't care. All that mattered was putting as much distance between them and the people who were trying to take him down. But the woods were dark, and the air felt thick with tension. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the leaves, made Marcus's head snap around. They were being hunted. Suddenly, a crackle of gunfire echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of shouting voices. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. They weren't just chasing them. They were trying to kill them. The woods had never felt so hostile. "Keep moving," Hayes shouted, her grip firm around Marcus's wrist. The ground under their feet was soft, making their steps more difficult as they sprinted deeper into the woods. Marcus's breath came in ragged gasps, and his thoughts raced, trying to keep up with the situation. They were running for their lives now, nothing else mattered. Survival. The truth could wait. But as they pushed forward, something changed. The trees ahead seemed to part just enough to reveal a faint light in the distance. A clearing? A safe place? Marcus didn't know, but he couldn't stop. He had no choice but to follow. "We're almost there," Hayes called over her shoulder. "Stay close." The light grew brighter as they neared, and Marcus's pulse quickened. The clearing ahead was small but seemed to offer a kind of refuge, a place where they could regroup, even if just for a moment. As they reached the clearing, Hayes stopped abruptly, pulling Marcus to a halt. She motioned for silence, and they both crouched low in the brush, watching. A black SUV was parked just at the edge of the clearing. Men in dark suits were standing beside it, their attention directed elsewhere. Hayes and Marcus exchanged a glance, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. "These are the ones who are hunting us," Hayes whispered. "We can't get too close. We need to go around." Marcus nodded, his mind whirling. They couldn't afford to be seen. They couldn't afford to be caught. Everything depended on their next move. But just as they turned to move silently into the trees, a voice broke the silence, one that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "Found them." The words were cold, spoken with a quiet certainty that made Marcus's blood run cold. The men had spotted them. Hayes's eyes widened in disbelief. "No. How?" Before they could react, a burst of gunfire rang out. The crack of gunfire rang through the night, sending a surge of adrenaline through Marcus's veins. His heart raced, his pulse a steady drum in his ears. The world felt like it was closing in on him, and there was no escape. Hayes dragged him further into the underbrush, her grip firm but urgent. They couldn't afford to stay in the open for too long. The men had already found them, and their voices were sharp with command, the sounds of footsteps and heavy breathing closing in. "Keep your head down," Hayes hissed, her voice low, but desperate. "We need to get out of here, now." Marcus couldn't breathe. His mind was spinning in circles, trying to make sense of it all. What was happening? Who were these men? Why were they hunting him? Every second felt like an eternity. Each breath seemed harder to take. "Why me?" Marcus whispered, unable to hold back the question anymore. "What do they want from me?" Hayes didn't answer right away. She just kept moving, her eyes darting to the sides, scanning for any sign of their pursuers. But Marcus could see the strain in her face, the edge of fear that she hadn't allowed herself to show until now. "They want more than just you, Marcus," she said quietly, her voice tense. "They want everything." Everything? The word echoed in his head, and for the first time, he realized how much bigger this was than just him. This wasn't some random conspiracy, some coincidence that had gotten out of hand. This was a game of power, and he had been a pawn in it all along. The thought hit him like a ton of bricks. "I don't understand," Marcus said, his voice strained. "I was just a doctor. I didn't know anything. How could I be a part of all of this?" Hayes stopped in her tracks, turning to face him. Her eyes were fierce, a quiet sadness behind them. "You weren't supposed to know. You were always meant to be in the dark, until now. Until they realized you could be the one to expose everything." Marcus stared at her, confused and overwhelmed. "Expose what?" "Everything," she repeated. "The corruption, the lies, the game they've been playing behind closed doors. It's bigger than you think, Marcus. Bigger than anything you could have imagined. And now they need you to stay silent. They need you to stay in line." "But I didn't know any of this," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I didn't ask for any of it. I never wanted any part in this." "I know," Hayes whispered. "But that doesn't change the fact that you are a part of it now. And if we don't stop them, if we don't expose the truth, we might all be trapped in this nightmare forever." The weight of her words sank in, but Marcus couldn't focus on them. Not yet. He had to stay focused. They needed to survive. They needed to get away. He glanced over his shoulder, hearing the faint sounds of movement in the distance. They were getting closer. The men were closing in. Without a word, Hayes motioned for him to follow. She moved quickly, silently, blending with the shadows of the trees. Marcus's every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead, his body sluggish with exhaustion. He hadn't slept in days, hadn't had time to think, let alone process what was happening. But there was no time for doubt now. He had no choice but to keep moving. Minutes passed, and the sounds of their pursuers seemed to fade, but Marcus knew they were still out there. They weren't safe. Not yet. Hayes finally stopped, crouching down low behind a fallen log. She motioned for Marcus to join her, and he did, his body trembling with the effort of staying still. They were in the clear, for now. Marcus's breath was heavy as he lowered himself to the ground, trying to steady his pulse. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, of doubts, but one thing was clear: if they didn't make it through this, if they didn't expose the truth, everything they had fought for would be in vain. "I can't do this alone," Marcus said quietly, looking at Hayes. "You're not alone," she replied softly. "You never were. We've got one chance to make this right, Marcus. We need to take it." But even as she said the words, Marcus could sense the heaviness in her voice. She knew the stakes, knew what they were up against. And it was terrifying. The truth, the whole truth, was something he wasn't sure he was ready for. But it was the only thing left. The only thing that mattered now.